Hey everyone, welcome. If you can hear me, would you let me know in the chat box, please? All right, awesome. Well, welcome. I'm super excited you're here. Thanks so much for taking an hour out of your night or your day, depending on where you are in the world, to chat with me about guided reading. We're going to start in like 1 minute, but while we're waiting, I'd love it if you would share where in the world you are and also what grade you teach. And I apologize for the weird lighting over here. It's a little bit dark. One of my lamps burned out, but all right. Hey, Heather, Vicky, Sarah, welcome. Marina, welcome. Hello, Catherine, Deborah. Let's see, we got Catherine, pre-K teacher. Amy's in Clarendon Hills, second grade teacher. Danny in Hawaii, awesome. Hello, Tiffany in Idaho. Judy, Laurel in Canada, welcome. Vicky in New York. Marina's in Texas, welcome Marina. Marina and Maria in New Jersey, welcome. Jennifer, Kathy in Canada. Jennifer in California, close to Sacramento, first grade, welcome. Janet in Virginia. Barbara in New Jersey. It's going fast. Micah in Kentucky, welcome. Lisa, Elizabeth, Susan, Sarah. Hello, Sarah. Ashley, Julie, Phyllis, Vanessa. Oh my gosh, we have teachers from all over, all different grades and backgrounds. That's awesome. I'm so glad you're here. So it is time to get going, and we're going to get started right on time. I was hoping originally that this workshop would be a little bit shorter than usual. It did end up taking about an hour, but we shouldn't go much over an hour. So again, thank you so much for coming. Hopefully it'll all be smooth sailing as far as technology goes tonight. But should you have any problems, what I would recommend doing is using the reconnect button on your end, or you can also go back to those reminder emails. You can always go back to that link and get back on. And they also recommend to use the Google Chrome browser. So hopefully it'll be smooth sailing, but should you have any problems, just try different things until you find a browser that works, and you can always reconnect. Alrighty, I'm gonna go ahead and switch to my slides. Okay, so a couple of quick housekeeping items. There is a delay. So whatever you're hearing me say right now, I actually said 20 seconds ago. So just something to keep in mind with the chat box. And speaking of the chat box, please do use it. Ask questions, add on to what I'm saying, answer each other's questions. We have so much expertise in our little virtual room here because you all are here. So definitely make use of that. Whoops, scroll ahead. Definitely make use of that chat box. I do want to mention occasionally people will get locked out of the chat box. Not quite sure why that happens, other than the fact that the chat box gets full because, like on Monday when I did this, we had so many teachers that 1 or 2 teachers did get locked out. If that happens to you, just keep trying, and it may be the device that you're on. It just kind of depends, but use that chat box. I will for sure miss comments, unfortunately, and questions, but I do kind of scroll back, and then at the end, I try to answer as many questions as I can. You are going to get a freebie at the end of tonight, and there'll be a lot of information in there, but you may want to grab pencil and paper just to have that handy in case there's something you want to jot down. And I always say this before I teach any workshop, I'm sharing what I have learned as a literacy specialist, and before that I was a classroom teacher. But ultimately, you have to do what you feel is best for the kids in front of you. And I do understand that your district or your school might have different requirements from what I'm sharing here. So just something to keep in mind as we get started here. All right, so I know lots of you have been on my workshops before, and if that's you, thank you so much for coming back. I'm so glad that you liked it enough to come back for more. But if we don't know each other yet, my name is Allison. I am a literacy specialist, and I always say K2, but actually I'm working with some third graders too this year, so I'll say K3. But before I was a literacy specialist, I taught pre-K, I taught kindergarten for several years, first and second. So I have some classroom experience as well. Been working in schools for, I guess, like 12 years now. And this is my husband, Jonathan. We live in the suburbs of Nashville. These are our fur babies, Max and Lindsay. And in my free time, I love to be outside. It actually was like 60 degrees here today. Don't want to make anyone jealous. I know some of you are very cold right now, but it's been cold here too. So when I can, I love to get outside, love to hike, kayak, run, all that fun stuff. So that's me. Here is the plan for tonight. As I said, it's going to be about an hour. And the first thing I'm going to go over really quickly is how I generally structure my guided reading lessons and just some general tips, or I'm going to share some things that I think about when I'm planning. Now, tonight is not intended to be, this is what guided reading is and this is how you do it. But if you're at that beginning level and you don't know a lot about guided reading, I still believe that this will be helpful for you, whether you're at a beginning or more advanced level, because I'm going to share some real lessons that I taught, and I'm going to tell you what happened during the lessons and then how I use that information to plan the next lesson for 2 different levels, for like a C, D group and an I group. And the reason why I'm doing this is because personally, the way that I learn best is by going into other teachers' classrooms, learning from them. It just makes me think, hey, I never thought of doing it like that. I feel like we kind of get blinders on sometimes and we're in our own bubble. And I know that it's really helpful for me to see other teachers' lessons and watch them teach. So although I can't invite you all into my classroom or my area because I'm a reading specialist, I'm trying to kind of create that experience for you by walking you through these real lessons that I taught. So all of that said, if by the end of the workshop you feel like, there's some, holes or gaps in my understanding of guided reading, I will answer questions for sure. Happy to do that. But in the freebie, which I'm going to be giving away at the end, in the freebie on the first page, you're going to find links to 2 other guided reading workshops that I've done in the past. So if there's things that, you're still not quite sure about, I would definitely check those out. Those are YouTube links that you can just kind of watch whenever suits you. So after we go over those real lessons, I'm then going to share some information about planning for pre-A readers. So those little ones who aren't reading quite yet, they're working on those emergent literacy skills. After that, I'm going to share a little bit of information with you about a brand new guided reading resource that I just put out on Friday. And we're also going to be doing a giveaway. If you are still here live at the end and I call your name, you can win all of the guided reading resources that I have available. So definitely make sure to stick around, be there live for the giveaway. The end is also when I'll be sharing the freebie with you and then answering any questions that I missed throughout tonight. So that's the plan. I know some of you have seen this before, but just real quick, this is how I structure most of my guided reading lessons. I wouldn't say that I never deviate because sometimes I do, but more or less this is what it looks like with level A, B, and up. So the first thing we start off with is some fluency items. These are review items, things to get the kids into the flow of the lesson. And my kids come, they sit down at the guided reading table. I have available for them some books that they've read in previous lessons. So they just pull them out. They practice reading them. They're developing that fluency. They're all working on their own. Meanwhile, I pull what I call the star student to sit next to me. So this is a child that I've chosen to take a running record on. So I pull that star student. Maybe it's Kellen. Kellen comes to sit next to me. And I say, okay, Kellen, I want you to read this book that we read in the previous lesson. So while he's reading either that book or part of that book, depending upon how long it is, I'm taking a running record. Afterward, I do a quick retell. I just want to make sure that he understands what he read. That's important too. And then after that, I kind of wrap things up, have the other kids put their books away. I do like maybe a sight word flashcard or 2, and then that's kind of the end of the fluency items. This is challenging, but I try to keep it like 3 to 5 minutes, no more than that. So as you can imagine, as we get up into like the higher level books and everything, we don't always read the whole book for the running record. All right, the next thing I do is I introduce the new book for the day, and you'll see in the real lessons that I share, you'll see what that looks like and sounds like. Then the kids read, and I'm available to coach them, right? I'm available to support them because I already did the running record up here. After that, we discuss the content of the text, whatever it was that we read. And then if there's a strategy that I want to review or teach them, that happens then too. And then last but not least, as long as there's time, if it's something that I want to work on with this group, then we'll do a little bit of word work or writing. And again, in the real lessons, I'll show you just some quick examples. So before we do get into those specific lessons, I wanted to explain just a little bit about how I choose the topics that we're covering in guided reading. You know, how I choose the genre of the text. What strategies do we go over? I'm not pulling that out of thin air, right? So these are the questions that I ask myself when I'm trying to figure that out. So the first thing that I ask myself is there something that we're covering in whole group that these students need to practice? So let's say we're working on asking questions in whole group in my second grade, whole group class. Well, if I have guided reading groups that need to practice asking questions, it really makes sense to work on that during guided reading at the level of text that they're reading, right? So if it applies and it's something they need to work on, then I absolutely cover it because I want to get that continuity between what I'm teaching in my whole group mini lessons and my guided reading. Now, we all know some of our kiddos are going to be like, beyond that, it would be too easy. And then some kids, it's just going to be too hard for, right? They're not working on asking questions because maybe they're still struggling with just retelling. So if this is not the case and I don't want to address something that's, we're working on in a whole group, then I'll ask myself, did I notice something in the previous lesson that this group of students needs to work on? So just looking for areas of weakness or, opportunities for growth. If I'm still not sure what I want to teach, the last thing I ask myself is, what skills should be learned at this guided reading level? And what have I not addressed yet? So a really good book for this is one by Fountas and Pinnell, and it's called The Continuum of Literacy Learning. It breaks down for you, okay, at a level C, this is what readers are working on. So that's a really good resource to have. It can be a little bit expensive, so it might be something that you ask your principal for. Or if you have my guided reading packs, then you know that I kind of break down for you in the rubrics and checklists. That's already broken down for you what you should be working on at each guided reading level. So if you do have my packs, definitely use that if you're wondering what to work on at each level. And then one last thing before we dive into those lessons, wanted to talk quick about choosing a text level. So I know more or less what level my readers are reading at or what their instructional level is because, I've benchmarked them at the beginning of the year or the middle of the year. And so I know what their baseline was. And then I take those running records that I mentioned, I'm taking them one per guided reading group that I see. So I'm constantly paying attention to, how's their comprehension, how's their decoding. So I have a good handle usually of what level they should be reading at. But when I'm choosing books, when kids are reading at levels A through K, which is like kindergarten through early second, I'm looking for a text that I believe my group will read with 90 to 94% accuracy and good comprehension, or with a little better accuracy, but they're going to have some comprehension issues. So that's what I'm aiming for. With like mid-second grade and up, if they're on grade level, I'm looking for a text that the kids are going to read with 95 to 97% accuracy and good comprehension, or even better accuracy, but some gaps in comprehension. So of course, when I'm choosing text, I'm not always spot on, but this is kind of what I'm aiming for. And I'm always paying attention to what level they're reading at because I'm doing those running records. See if I can grab maybe a question or two if anything's come up yet. So the slides, so those were emailed out beforehand, but they're also coming to you. So I think I set it up for like 2 hours from now, you are going to get an email that has the slides. So if it didn't come through for some reason, I know sometimes emails fall through the cracks, not to worry, you definitely are going to get those slides. Melody, the resource book I just mentioned was the Continuum of Literacy Learning, and that's by Fountas and Pinnell. Pina was asking about the Jen Saravayo resource books. I have her decoding strategy book, and I definitely think that's a helpful book to have for sure. Okay, I know I'm missing some stuff, and I apologize, but I know that some of us have to go after an hour, so I'm going to continue on going. I will circle back and get questions, and then again at the end, for sure, I will try to get to all of the questions. Okay, so let's look at this real lesson. Now, I'm calling this my level C D group, and the reason why I have it at both levels is because, as you'll see in a minute, this group in this pair of lessons that I'm showing you, they were moving from a C to a D. So this particular group, this was a second grade group, and these were English language learners. So these kiddos, where I used to teach in Illinois, they had a bilingual program. So these children learned to read in Spanish first, and then they were working with me to learn to read in English. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share with you lesson 1, a lesson that I taught. I'm going to talk you through how it went, what I did, and then I'm going to share lesson 2 with you. They're not necessarily like the first lesson of the year or the second. They weren't. They were taught in like March. But what I'm trying to show you is after lesson 1, this is what I learned, and this is how it helped me plan lesson 2. So you're going to see 2 lessons for this group. Okay, so this lesson is going to be in your freebie. You'll be able to look at it in more depth and refer back to it if you like. But this follows that structure that I showed you at the beginning. And if you remember, we started with fluency items. So I gave these kids fake names. It's Allie, Isaac, and Christopher. Same initial, different name. But so Allie, Isaac, and Christopher came to, it wasn't even a table. We were reading in the hallway because that's the space that we had. They came to the hallway and sat down with me. And they all started by picking up a book that we read in the previous lesson, and they were rereading it. So this book was Nests, which was a level C, and I had Allie sit next to me, and I took a running record of Allie's reading. Now, if you're not familiar with running records, not to worry. There is a link in the freebie that goes, it's the Guided Reading 102 workshop, goes over running records in more depth. But even if you're not familiar with them, basically all I'm doing is I'm marking whether the child is, reading words correctly, whether they're self-correcting words, making mistakes. I'm just writing all that down. And so these red marks are what I wrote. This is the text of the book, and I put it here for our purposes. But what really happened during this lesson is I didn't have the words of the book printed out. I was just taking on blank paper. It was a blank running record form. I was just check marking if the word was correct. And then if it was incorrect, I would write the actual word and then write what she said. In this case, she was appealing for help. She was asking me for help. And then I gave her this word. So here she self-corrected. She started by saying the, and she fixed it. And then the only other thing that happened really was that she didn't get ground. Now, I wasn't super worried about this error. First of all, she is an English language learner, and ground wasn't something that was necessarily in her vocabulary. And then the other thing too is she's at level C. The OU spelling pattern was not something she would have mastered by now. So even though I gave it to her, I was not super worried, and I considered her to have done very well with this book just because of what I knew about her as a reader and the vowel spelling pattern there. So as you can see, her accuracy was high. It was 98%. Her self-correction rate was 1 to 2. This means that for every 2 mistakes she made, so this mistake and this mistake, she corrected one of them, right? So that's a good self-correction rate. We want, for our kids who make, 3 mistakes, we want them to correct every 1 in 3 mistakes. So she did even better. Her self-correction rate was 1 to 2, so that's good. I asked her to retell afterwards. As you can see, it was a pretty quick book, so we had plenty of time for that. She gave a good retelling, and then her fluency was decent. I just rate them 1 out of 3, 1 being low, 3 being high. So her fluency was fine. So let me go back up to this lesson plan. So that was how the very first part of the lesson went. I considered her to have done very well with that running record. And then I had for the whole group, I said, all right, guys, let's wrap it up. And then they put their books away. I showed them the word this on a flashcard. And the reason why I chose this was because this was the first word in the book that we read the previous day. And they all actually struggled with it at first. So that's why I stuck it on a card. With my English language learning groups, I try to make sure that the sight words are really connected to the text that we're reading. Now, it's important for any readers to, see the sight words in context and understand what they mean, but especially for English language learners, I want it to be very connected to what we're reading. So that's why I chose this. And as you can see, it wasn't a bunch of flashcards. It was just one, and then we were done. All right, so this was the fluency items portion, and then I introduced the new text. And the new text was also level C, and it was called My Accident. So this book was about a little boy who was skateboarding. He fell and broke his arm, and then had to go to the hospital and all that. So that's what the text was about. But here's what I told them before we read. This was a new book for them. So I said, okay, boys and girls, this new book that I brought to share with you is called My Accident. Let's look at the cover. So I showed them the cover and I said, what do you think is going to happen in the story? So I got them to discuss what they saw and make some predictions. And then I also wanted to talk about the word skateboard. Now, skateboard is not a word that level C readers would normally know how to decode, right? It's a compound word. There's like this long vowel spelling pattern with like, I think that's like an R-controlled verb, R-controlled vowel, ord. Yeah. So it was a tricky word. Now, children who speak English as their first language would probably be able to look at the picture, see the skateboard, and be like, oh, that's skateboard. But I wasn't sure that these kids would be able to do that. And the word for skateboard in Spanish, I believe, is patineta. So it was a totally different word. It did not look like skateboard. So for this reason, I opened up the book, I showed them the word skateboard on the actual page. We read it together, and I just made sure that they knew what it meant. I don't want to take away all the tricky words so that I'm, telling them everything and they already know so much going into it. But I thought that if they didn't get that important word in the text, then it was just going to trip them up. I wanted to make sure they understood it and knew what it meant. So we went over skateboard, and then they started reading. So it was a pretty quick book introduction, but I did leave some time for that discussion. So then here's what the actual book looked like in terms of the text. This was level C. Pretty repetitive. Here I am on my skateboard. Here I am on the ground, ambulance, hospital, etc. So some of the story is told through the words, but a lot of it is told through the pictures. You see what's happening in the pictures, and that's how the kids knew what was going on in the story. So they read, they did pretty well with it, which I kind of anticipated. Afterward, they did a retelling, and here's how I had them do it. This lesson I taught in March of this year. So by March, they were pretty skilled with the retelling. So what I did is I chose a leader, and they knew this routine. I chose a leader. I think it was Christopher. And he started the retelling. And then he said, okay, now it's Allie's turn. So he chose someone to go next, and she continued the retelling. And then Isaac finished the retelling. So basically they did it all by themselves. And I encouraged them to not self-correct, but correct each other. If they made mistakes, I encouraged them to go back to the book, but they really had control over that retelling. Not something that I do immediately at the beginning of the school year, but it's something that we work up to. So then the other thing that I really wanted them to get out of this book is that on the last page, the little boy has come back from the hospital and he's sitting on the couch with his dad, and his dad is showing him this like helmet and knee pads and stuff. And the dad in a little speech bubble is saying, look at this. So what I wanted the kids to infer was, from using this picture and the fact that it said, look at this, I wanted them to infer that the dad was giving the kid this protective gear so that he wouldn't break his arm in the future. So I asked them that, and they were absolutely able to explain it, which I was happy about. And then next, sometimes I would go into a strategy like, let's practice breaking up a word, or I noticed that Christopher did this and this helped him figure out the word or whatever. Sometimes it would be a strategy that I would go for, right? That I would review or teach. When I wrote this lesson plan, I wrote TBD because, as you can tell, the kids were doing very well with the level C texts. They also knew how to read at a higher level in Spanish. So their strategy use for what they needed to be able to do at level C, it was pretty good. I'm not saying they had all the strategies down pat, but they were pretty strong. So I left this open. I kind of wanted to see what would happen in the lesson, which is something that I do sometimes. And what I found was that they didn't need to talk about a strategy, but we needed to talk about what a cast was. So in the text, it does say the word cast. And they could read the word phonetically. It's just like a long vowel and an ending blend. But I don't think that they knew, or I didn't think that they knew the word in English. So they read it, but they didn't know what it meant. So instead of talking about a strategy or whatever, we talked about the word cast. I told them the word in Spanish and we just discussed what it meant. So that's what I used that time for. Last but not least, this group was working on spelling words with digraphs, blends, and short vowels. Short vowels going from Spanish to English are a little bit tricky because in Spanish, the vowels more or less just make one sound. And so the English vowels, the sounds are different, a little bit hard. So they were working on that. And then let me show you what we did. The word work activity for today was super simple. So in my day-to-day guided reading binder, I have these plastic zip pouches, which I really love. And in the zip pouch, that's where I kind of put any like extra loose materials that we might need. But what I love to do is, if I know that I'm working with a group at like level C or whatever, I have pictures that represent words that are appropriate for that level. So here there's words like drip and math, fish, ship. These are words that these kids were working on learning how to spell. They were working on short vowels. They go with this level, right? I just have this baggie and it's labeled level C, D. These pictures are from my guided reading packs if you have them, but you can use any pictures. I just love having them available in that pouch because there's so many different things we can do, right? I could pull them out and have them sort them. I could, say a word or say part of a word, this, look for a picture that ends in or something, right? And they pick math. I could have them write them. There's so many different options. And so what I did today, or not today, but what I did when I taught this lesson was I had them spell words using these little picture cards. So for example, I held up the picture of a ship and I tried to get them to say the word ELL group working on vocabulary. So they said ship, or I probably had to help them with that. They probably said boat. I said ship. They wrote ship on their individual whiteboards. And then I had them put the cap on their marker. And then I said, okay, I want you to tell me slowly the sounds in ship. So they told me sh, I, p. And as they were telling me, I was using these sound boxes to spell the word ship. And I showed them, I use these boxes, SH makes one sound, I makes another, and P makes the P sound, right? So I showed them how I did it with the sound boxes, and then they fixed their own work. And that was it. So we did this for a couple of different pictures, good for vocabulary. They were working on those short vowels. They did okay. They, again, were really struggling with the short vowels. And so what I believe I had them do is I had them focus, and I would say, okay, now what's the vowel sound in ship? And they would say eh, or whatever. And I would have them look at my mouth to see what my mouth looked like when I was making that vowel sound, because that was just helpful to them. Again, and going from the Spanish vowels to the English vowels, looking at my mouth was something that we did too. And I tried to focus on those short vowels, but walking away from this little activity, I knew that we needed some more practice. So that's what we did for word study. It was pretty fast, just like a couple minutes, very simple, nothing fancy, but it was what they needed. So that was lesson 1. So here's what I learned from that lesson. I was honestly a little bit surprised with how well they did with my accident. I was expecting them to do well because they had been doing well with level C text, but some of those words were more complex. Like if you remember, ambulance, hospital. But what I found is that they were looking at the pictures, and that's good that they had that vocabulary, but it also made me realize that we really needed to get into some more complex text to challenge them and make sure that they're really decoding the words, not just thinking about what makes sense. Because the accuracy was 98% on that running record I took from Allie, that's a book that Allie honestly could have read independently. Now, it was a warm read, meaning we'd read it during the previous lesson, so she might have scored a little lower on that one if I'd taken it as a cold running record the first time. But generally speaking, the kids in this group had been missing, like 1, maybe 2 words in each book for the past couple of lessons. So that pattern showed me that it was time to move up. I don't decide to move a group up based on one good running record. I have to look at all the kids and make sure they're all ready to move up. But by this point, I had a couple of running records that showed me, they're probably ready to move up. I also mentioned this here. They still need to work on words with short vowels, blends, and digraphs. They were confusing SH and CH. So again, we just needed to practice more of what we'd been doing. All right. So based upon what happened in lesson 1, I then planned my lesson 2, right? So we started the lesson by rereading My Accident. That was still a level C book. This time I did the running record on Christopher. He did well with it. That confirmed my decision to move them up. For the sight words, we did this and here. Here came from the My Accident book. I maybe had to help them get started on that if I remember correctly. I also had them write the sight word this time, and that's something that could have gone later, but in the particular lesson, I just had the whiteboards handy. They read the words, but they also wrote them. That's really good for helping them remember those sight words and also spell them. And then we got into the new book. So the new book was a level D, and this is the first time that I had them in level D. So this was a Puppy Mudge book. Puppy Mudge has a snack. And I wanted to be careful about my book introduction. I wanted to make sure I wrote it out beforehand. I do not always write out my book introductions, but when I'm moving a group to a new level, I usually do because I really want to think out like, okay, how can I help this group be successful with this book? What do I need to say? So here's what I said. I said, this book is about Mudge, and Mudge is Henry's puppy. Mudge and Henry are two of my favorite characters. So in the story, Henry has a snack. Mudge really wants to eat Henry's snack. And then I asked them, do you think Henry will let him? Why or why not? So we talked about that a little bit. And I said, okay, we're going to read to find out if Mudge gets a snack. So I was setting the purpose for reading. Also in the book introduction, I taught them the word drools. Just like with that word skateboard before, I opened the book up. I pointed to the word drools. I read it to them. They read it. We talked about what it meant. And here's why I chose this word. There were some other words that I thought might be tricky for them, but drools, I honestly felt like was so out of reach that they just would not get it. The OO with the ooh, that was a pattern they didn't know. And they probably didn't have that word in their English vocabulary anyway to do drools, right? They wouldn't necessarily know, they wouldn't necessarily see the picture and know what that was. So that's why I chose to teach it to them. They didn't know that word, as it turned out, and we looked at the picture, and then after we looked at that word, then they started reading. So this book, if you remember the level C book, the level D book has a little more variety. There's less of a pattern. Mudge is like trying to get Henry's snack, and Henry keeps saying, no, Mudge, no, Mudge. So that part repeats, but there's so many other unique words. It was definitely trickier. And they definitely needed support while they were reading, which I anticipated. So I tried to kind of jump from kid to kid, and there were only 3 in this group. I jumped from kid to kid, supporting them, just kind of listening to them read. At this level, they were whisper reading, so they were all reading at their own pace, but I could kind of listen in and see how they were doing. After we finished the book, because the book was still pretty short, I asked them, I circled back to that main purpose that I set for reading. I asked them, did Mudge get a snack? And how did he get it? And there was a little bit of confusion. They understood that he got a snack. They could have gotten that from the picture, though. They were a little bit confused about why he ended up getting a snack. And the reason they were confused is because some of them didn't get the word cute. This is a word with a long vowel. Level D, we're getting into more words like this, but, they didn't have that down yet. So this is something that I had kind of anticipated beforehand. I originally was going to have the comprehension discussion and then talk about the word cute and the long vowel. But as it turned out, because they were confused about the word cute, they didn't understand the fact that Mudge acted cute, and that's how we got the snack. So we still ended up talking about this, but I had to integrate this a little bit of almost word study here in order to finish the comprehension conversation so that they would really understand that Mudge got the snack because he was acting cute. So that's kind of how the post-reading discussion went. And then for a follow-up activity, it was super simple again, but if you remember, we still needed to work on short vowels and blends and digraphs. So I picked a couple of words. I think maybe I also ended up picking a word with SHCH because they were working on that, but I used it in a sentence relating to the book, right? So Henry wanted Mudge to stop asking for a snack, and then they wrote it on the whiteboards, and I did the same thing with using the Elkonin boxes for spelling, had them look at my mouth for the vowel if they needed to. So it was pretty similar to the previous lesson, but we weren't using pictures this time. We were using ideas from the text. So that was lesson 2. As you can see, it wasn't anything fancy, all we needed for the word work activities. Sometimes my word work activities are a little more complicated or they involve more stuff, but sometimes it's just we're writing words and they have something to do with the book and that's it. Just a couple of things I want to point out, a few last things about this lesson sequence. I already mentioned this. I wrote out the book intro completely because we're moving into a new level. Wanted to point out that they're working on spelling one type of word, like the words with short vowels, but they're working on reading a different type of word, the word with long vowels, the words with long vowels, like cute. So we were talking about long vowels, but I wasn't necessarily asking or expecting them to spell them correctly because in their development, they were still at short vowels and, they could read words with short vowels, but they couldn't yet spell or write words with short vowels consistently. So just want to point that out. We were still talking about long vowels and, looking at that because they were reading them. But when we were actually practicing spelling and writing words, it was short vowels. One other last thing I wanted to point out is, I said this before, strategy instruction is certainly important for ELLs, but sometimes I find that I need to spend more time focusing on vocabulary and language features, like that CAST thing that I was talking about, both before and after reading a text. All right, so that was the level C. I know I've missed lots of wonderful questions. I'll try to pick up a couple. So Jill, running records, I do cold reads when we do benchmarking to make sure that I got their level down. And then I do warm reads during the lessons usually. But if I'm really not sure about a child's level, then I will go back to a cold read. Cold warm, if you're not familiar with that. Cold read means they've never seen the book before. Warm read means they have seen the book like once. Or more, I suppose. Okay, so Tiffany says, what do you recommend for the maximum number of students in a group? So it definitely depends on the level. So both the grade and the level. So my lower groups, I like to keep fewer kids in, like 3 if possible. No more than 6 typically is the rule of thumb that I've learned because there's not going to be more than 6 books. Like when they have those prepackaged guided reading like sets, there's not usually more than 6 books anyway. And that tends to be a lot. Like I wouldn't have 6 kids in a group probably ever in kindergarten if I can help it. First grade, probably not at the beginning of the year. And then again, I wouldn't want my lowest groups to have 6 books. All right, asked, so my blog is learning@theprimarypond.com if you're looking for it. All right, we are going to keep moving on. But again, I will come back to more questions later. Okay, so let's move on to my level I group. And if you are like a second grade teacher or up, even if this level is too easy for your kids, I still think that this is the lesson that's going to be most applicable to, because in this lesson, we were working on text features and comprehension. So even if you don't have decoding issues to talk about with your kids, not that this group didn't have decoding issues because they certainly had their own challenges, but if you work with the upper grades, this kind of thing is more along the lines of what you would be doing. So again, I'm going to show you lesson 1 and then lesson 2. Okay, so just like with the level C group, they were rereading a familiar text. It was a level I book, and I chose to do a running record with Matthew. I did have the words on the page this time. I think this book is actually from my guided reading bundle, and so you do get a printout with the words on it. But again, you can take a running record whether you've got a blank sheet of paper. I've taken one on a napkin when I forgot to make a copy once. Or you can take it with the words on the page. Just depends on what's available to you. So these are the errors that Matthew made. And this is kind of a typical, I would say, English language learner error. Instead of reading finished, he read finish. Left off that inflectional ending. Instead of saying asked, he said asked. And then this is just one self-correction he made. Instead of couldn't, he said could, but then he fixed it. So this was not the whole book. Level I books kind of start to get a little bit more long, complex. So I just had him, I marked off, okay, I wanted him to read 100 or 200 words, and I marked it off, and then he read that many. So his accuracy was 96%, which was fine. I want for my English language learning groups, I want them to not be at like 90% typically for decoding, unless it's like level A, B, C, like the beginning levels. And the reason for this is if my English language learners are focusing so hard on figuring out what the words actually say, then their attention is really not going to be freed up to comprehend the book typically. So for this reason, I try to make sure their accuracy is a little bit higher so that they can focus more on comprehending the text. Now, with his comprehension, it was pretty good. Again, this is a warm read, so he does recall from the previous read. For every 3 mistakes he made, he fixed 1, which is good. And then his fluency was fine. I rated it as a 2 out of 3. So that's how Matthew's running record went. Didn't have any sight words for this group. Doesn't necessarily mean that we never worked on sight words, because we did. But I knew they were doing some of that in their classroom, and so I really wanted to focus on comprehension and genre and just other things for this lesson. All right, so after that, I introduced the new book. I had chosen this book called Cats. It was a level I book, and I decided that we were only going to read through page 8. I used to be so tempted to because I taught kindergarten before I taught like first and second, and the kindergarten books are pretty short. So I was used to getting through entire texts. But what I found when I moved up into like first grade, second grade, the books were too long for us to always get through the whole text and really go deep with comprehension. And like I said, this was my goal for this group. I wanted to go deep with comprehension. So even though they might have been able to read the entire text in one day, I decided not to. I cut it in half and I just introduced the first half of the book. So here's what I didn't write this out. I just kind of made notes about what I wanted to do. This is a little bit lengthy because I knew that I wanted to kind of lay the foundation for them. But I had them make predictions about the content. So I had them look at the cover page through. What do you think you're going to learn about? I then had them turn to the table of contents. And I knew that this group, these were really sweet, compliant kids. And I knew that they wouldn't necessarily skip over the table of contents. They would read it, but they would just kind of read it and not really think about, why does the author include that? How can that help us as readers? So we looked through that first half of the table of contents, the part that we're going to read, and we talked about, this is how you prepare your brain to read. The categories of information that you're going to learn about, so it's getting your brain ready. So we talked about that a little bit. Talked about why the author would include a table of contents, and then we discussed the layout of the text. So this is what the book looked like. With a lot of the other books that we'd been reading, it was, text and then there was a picture, text and there was a picture, but this was different. So as you can see here, there's a photo and there's some labels going on here. And then down here, there were these questions, and then you turn the page and there was an answer, right? So it was laid out a little differently. And I wanted to show them that, talk about that, and encourage them to integrate the information they were reading in the regular part of the text with these labels and really not only just read them, but think about what they meant. So that's why we went over the layout. Let's see. So that was basically the introduction. They read the book. They did, decoding was fine. It was not really an issue. But so afterward, I asked them, what did you learn from the text? That was kind of a routine that we had for nonfiction. There was a diagram. I think it was actually that cat picture or whatever, but I asked them if they knew what it was called. It's called a diagram, but then I really wanted to focus on why would the author include it and how does that diagram help us as readers? We also talked about headings in the book and their purpose. Just again, trying to get them to integrate that information, not only the main part of the text, but the text features too. For the strategy or teaching point, when I wrote this lesson, I just wrote TBD, to be determined, meaning that I wasn't entirely sure what strategy I wanted to go over. This group of readers, they were pretty advanced in Spanish. In Spanish, they were reading above grade level. So they had a lot of the strategies down. Here, I did not end up going over a decoding strategy, but I guess we integrate some strategy instruction when I was talking about, how does this diagram help us as readers? What should we do with it? So it ended up being comprehension strategy instruction that was kind of integrated with our discussion. The TBD just means that when I was planning the lesson, I didn't yet know what I wanted to cover. And the reason why I sometimes put TBD is because I often want to see what trips them up during the lesson itself, and then I'll teach a strategy that's applicable. Or sometimes what's really nice is if you have one child who uses a strategy really well and maybe the others don't, then you can say, hey, did you notice that Matthew did this? And this is how it helped him. So that's why sometimes I will pre-plan a strategy or teaching point, and sometimes I won't. And then last but not least, as you remember from the running record, I knew that this group was having some issues with those inflectional endings. So asked became asked and finished became finished. So I wanted to focus on that. And there were some words in the text that had the ed ending. So we talked about the words canned from the text and cooked. And for this word study activity, all I did is I explained, some words that end in ed, some of them have a d sound at the end, and others that end in ed, they have a t sound, t, right? So we talked about canned from the text. We talked about closed. I think that was also from the text. Cooked, looked, and walked. So basically, I was just introducing this concept to them. I was not asking them to spell these words. I wasn't necessarily asking for mastery of that yet. I just wanted to get them thinking about the fact that these make different sounds. And I also did a lot of having them read these words too. So that was lesson 1. And then what I learned from that lesson was that these kids had some experience working with text features. I hadn't been working with them for the entire year, but I wasn't quite sure how much experience they had with text features. They did have some. They could explain their purpose with some prompting. We just needed to continue to focus on getting them to integrate what they learned from the text features with the rest of the text. So they were paying attention to them. They weren't ignoring them, but I wanted them to understand why the author put them in there and how they could help them as readers. I also learned, which I knew kind of going into it, that we still needed some more practice working with those ed ending words. So based on all of that, I then planned lesson 2. It works out nicely if you have a book that you divide in 2, because then the rereading portion of your like the fluency items, if you do it the way I do it, your rereading is just rereading what you read in the previous lesson. So they reread that first part of Cats that they had read in the previous lesson. I took a running record on Isabella. She did well. Didn't do sight words again. Then we read the rest of the text, right? And so the way I introduced it, I said, okay, we're going to read the rest of this book, but let's look back at that table of contents. Remember, what do we do with the table of contents? How does that help us? So we kind of reviewed that. I had them read through the second part so they know what we would be reading about. And then I also decided to discuss that layout of the questions and answers at the bottom. So like I showed you, with this particular book, there were little questions like, do cats have tails? Little fun fact. And then on the next page, you would see the answer. So we didn't talk a ton about that the first time. I just saved that for the second time. Another nice thing about not reading, one book in one day. And then I also asked them to set the purpose for reading. So sometimes, I would say, okay, we're going to read 2, or we're going to read because, but with this group, I wanted them to think, why are we going to read this text? What's our purpose here? So they were able to do that. They then finished the book. I then asked them, what main topics were covered in the second half of this text. So I was trying to get them to use the headings to talk about the main topics. They were able to with a little bit of guidance. I asked them what they learned. And then we talked about those Q&As, like what little facts did you learn from those? When I was going into this lesson, I knew that I wanted to talk about integrating information that you learn when you sit down and read a book over like multiple sessions or multiple days. So I asked them, okay, so how does what you learned today, what does that have to do with what you read in our previous lesson? And they had reread it today, right? But I wanted them to just think about like, how are these parts related to each other? And what can I learn if I think about all of it at once, right? So that was the main strategy or teaching point. And then last but not least, I wrote a few ED words on the whiteboard. I think they were from the book, and I asked the kids to pronounce them. We discussed the differences in ED pronunciations like we had before. Again, I'm not asking them to write these yet because we're just working on pronunciation and paying attention to that inflectional ending. Okay, so things to notice. Broke up the text over 2 days. We basically talked about that already. My text introductions, I've noticed with English language learners, they tend to be a little bit longer than they are with fluent English speakers. I don't want to have them drag on, but I do like to give them enough so that they can be successful. And then I also wanted to point out that this group definitely had things that they could work on in terms of like spelling word patterns. But because my main focus was comprehension and they were having trouble with those inflectional endings too, I knew they were working on words in class. I just decided to take a different direction. Whereas, like with the CD group, we were writing some words with short vowels. So that was a little difference between these two groups. In your freebie, you are going to get a whole list of accommodations and just ideas for modifying your guided reading lessons for your English language learners. I'm going to run through them real quick here, though. So I said this already. First, sometimes I allow for slightly longer pre-reading conversations, get them talking about the topic. If there's a topic that they have like no background knowledge about, like let's say Chinese New Year, if we're going into that book and I know that the vocabulary and language is going to challenge them, I don't necessarily want them to be so confused about what the topic is about, right? So I love to have my laptop or my iPad available and I'll pull up just like a little YouTube clip or a photo. And this is something that I do with my not ELLs too, right? My English speakers. And I do this because it gives them a little background knowledge, but it also gets them excited to read the book. When I'm pre-teaching vocabulary words before we read, I try to limit the number of words that I teach. You saw that I really only taught one per lesson. I typically just give them the definition rather than asking them to guess, and then I use the picture in the book whenever possible, or I bring my own picture. I also try to choose words that they may not be able to figure out through context, right? If they can figure out what a word means just by the sentence or the picture, I'm probably not going to teach that because I want them to do that work. Of course, we also want to use visuals whenever possible. If you have my guided reading packs, which I'll share more about later, use those posters for teaching decoding strategies. When you do word work, incorporate pictures. For vocabulary, just have your iPad and Google an image. Like it's so easy now with technology to be able to show them pictures and things. I also prefer to aim for a slightly higher level of accuracy and decoding so that my kids can focus on comprehension, especially in levels D and up. With your ELLs, you don't want them spending so much time figuring out the words that they cannot really focus on comprehending the text. Shorter texts or like dividing text up also helps so you can go deeper with comprehension. And I want to tell you a little bit real quick about a website called readworks.org. If you're not familiar with it, it has tons of free passages. Definitely make your free account and dig into it. But if you teach second grade and up and you have a ReadWorks account, which is free, look for these things called step reads. And these are super for your ELLs. For some topics, not all, but like let's say you want to read about Rosa Parks and you go into ReadWorks and you find a passage about Rosa Parks for second graders. If it has, you could filter out for step reads, but if it has a step read, there will be like a regular second grade passage and then there will be a passage that's designed for ELLs. So the vocabulary will be less complex. The language will be less complicated. You can have your kids, your guided reading groups, or even, whole group or whatever you're doing. You can have your kids read about the same topics, but you can have the step reads that are especially, designed for ELLs. So that's a really nice thing if you teach second grade and up. And again, that's from the website readworks.org. And then of course, when you're working with ELLs, all of our kids really, right? We always want to check for understanding. Some of my sweethearts will just nod their head, yes, I understand when I ask them, but I have to go beyond that because sometimes they may say they understand or think that they understand, but they actually don't understand. All right, let's see if I can get a question or two here. It's Faith, it's ReadWorks, readworks.org. Okay. So people were asking about where to get books. Reading A to Z is good, printable books. I have some books in the guided reading packs that I was mentioning. Benchmark Books has some good guided reading books as well. And I can, if you're wondering where to get books, you're always welcome to email me. I have some sites that I can send you to. All right, we're going to keep rolling. I am going to come back to more questions, but time goes so fast, so I want to keep moving. Let's switch gears a little, though. We're not going to go through like a pre-A lesson in this manner, but instead I'm going to share with you some different activities that you might include in your pre-A guided reading lessons. So this is for those kiddos who, when they read a level A text, they're not reading at 90% accuracy, right? Level A is still too hard for them. So that's why we say pre-A. Excuse me. These kids are still working on mastering those emergent literacy concepts like being able to point one-to-one, letter sounds. Again, they're not reading level A text with 90% accuracy. And they actually can be really diverse in needs. So you can have like a level A reader that doesn't even know how to write their name, but you can also have a level A reader that knows like most of their letter sounds, but they're just stuck for whatever reason. And I always try to incorporate my pre-A readers in guided reading. The guided reading that they do just looks a little bit different than the other levels. Okay, so in your freebie, there's going to be this breakdown of how you might, excuse me, I'm losing my voice, how you might structure your level pre-A or pre-A lesson plans. Now, it does depend on how much time you have. Like at the beginning of kinder, the groups are like 5 minutes because we're just getting started. And obviously we're not going to get everything in here if it's 5 minutes long. Later on, I like to work up to like 15 minutes. And so this would be like a 15-minute sort of lesson situation. But if you don't have 15 minutes, what I would do is just choose some of the things to work on like Mondays, and then on Tuesday or Wednesday, you work on some of the other things. So you do like an A day or B day setup. But anyway, in an ideal situation, I like to start by doing a little bit of name practice. This is only if they need it. This is just a minute or two. They're writing their name, practicing it. I'll show you some activities in a minute. As soon as they have got this mastered, then I remove it from the lesson plan. I then have them spend like 1 or 2 minutes working on letter identification. Then we go to phonological awareness activities. We work on letter sounds for a little bit longer, some print concepts, which I'll show you in a minute. And then we do some kind of book reading. If there's time after that, I might end on like handwriting or writing or sight word making or some oral language and vocabulary. There's lots of different things that I could add on here. It just depends what that group needs and how much time we have. Okay, so the name practice, it could be tracing. Maybe they're making names out of magnetic letters or tiles. Maybe they're writing with markers or colored pencils. Maybe you give them a little like pencil box and you fill it with sand or salt, and then they trace their name with their finger. Maybe you use a sentence strip and cut apart the letters and they have to put it back together. As I said, I do omit this from the lesson as soon as they've got their first name down. Next, we work on a little bit of letter identification, and that is both knowing the names of letters, but also visually distinguishing between them. So knowing that the O looks different from the A, right? That's a skill. So tons of different ways you can do this. I do like to work with an alphabet chart almost every lesson with my pre-A readers, where there's like A, picture of an apple, B, picture of a ball, whatever, right? So we all go through it together. A, apple, ab, B, bulb, right? So that's a way to practice letter identification, and that works with letter sounds too, but you can just do the names of the letters or the letter sounds depending on what you want to focus on. I also sometimes, depending on the level of the group, they might do some letter sorting, and maybe it's, A's over here, B's over here, or maybe it's these letters have curves, these letters are straight, and these letters have curves and straight. I think I actually sorted that one wrong because that should be over there. It has a curve and it's straight. I also have them match capital to lowercase letters sometimes, or they, fill in the missing letter here. This is from my pre-A resource, which I'll share with you about in a minute. And I also like to keep it in context by have them doing letter hunts. Now, I do not do all of these things per lesson. It's just like choose one thing per lesson. Then we get into phonological awareness, and you might already know that that is just working with sounds. Pictures can be involved too, but when we're talking about phonological awareness, we're not really showing them letters. It's just listening to the sounds. Having them close their eyes when you do these activities can help a little bit. This can be something like syllable clapping. So I say elephant and they say elephant, and they're clapping the syllables. I'm so sorry, my voice is not doing so well. We could play do they rhyme. So I say hug, mug. Do they rhyme? Thumbs up or thumbs down. This is just like a little picture version of that. A similar game is do they start the same? Sand, Sam. Do they start with the same sound? Yes, they do. Thumbs up. Or, of course, picture sorts are good. You know, these words start with and these words start with p, and they're sorting pictures. So these are all options for phonological awareness activities, and I'm sure you have many other wonderful ideas too. Then we do some letter sounds, and this takes a little bit longer than the other ones because I want to spend more time with this. Those like alphabet chants with A, apple, that's good for it. I also have in my pre-A resource where they can like trace each letter with their finger and they say the sound. That's really good for tactile. Letter matching or writing, like this is a picture of a P and then they have to write this is a picture of a pig and then they have to write the letter P. Bingo style games, you say the sound, they cover the letter G or whatever if you say G. Tons of different things you can do. And I try to come up with as many activities as possible because some kids do get stuck at pre-A and it takes them a while. So they're doing these activities for a while. A lot of pre-A readers also don't yet have all those print concepts down. So, you know, this is the title page. This is where you start reading. This is how you point one-to-one. This is a sentence, right? All of those concepts are things they need to learn. So we work on that. And typically we're working on that in the context of an actual book, which I'll show you the book reading next. But occasionally we'll do something like, okay, you know, here's words and letters, circle the ones that are words. Or we could do the opposite. We could circle the ones that are letters. Most of the time, though, it's done in context. So we always work with books during the pre-A lessons, almost always. And it doesn't have to be that the kids are reading, like with the other lesson examples I showed you. Maybe you read aloud to them and you discuss it. Maybe you do a shared reading where they're helping you read. Or maybe you work with emergent text like this one from my pre-A resource. Look at the map, look at whatever. This is actually even more, this is more like a beginning level A. Like some of the pre-A books are even more simple where they have like just a word or whatever for each picture. So when you're doing those emergent texts, you don't have to just give it to them and have them read it independently, right? Because they might not be successful like that. Typically, as I said before, I like to have my kids either whisper read or independent read books so that they get the most practice. But with pre-A readers, maybe you read a page and then they read a page and then you read a page and then they read a page. So you do an echo read. Or you all read it together at the same time, a choral read. Or maybe you read it to them and then they read it. When they're done doing any of these, like you do the whole book echo read or whatever, I like to have them go back and try to read the whole book on their own just to develop that fluency and independence. If you've got time, you can do something with the text of that book. So maybe you have them come up with a sentence and then you do some interactive writing where they're helping you write the sentence. Or maybe you have the sentence from the book, cut it up into words, mix up the words, and they help you put it back together. Whatever I do with the book reading, I always work on comprehension because I know that sometimes I tend to focus on, got to get those letter sounds, got to get this down, but comprehension is important too. We want them to understand from the very start that reading is about understanding and making meaning. Okay, so I mentioned these before. If there's time, we might end on a little letter formation or handwriting, writing, which I talked about a little bit, sight word making. Make sure that they do understand the concept of a word, though, too, before you're having them memorize a ton of sight words. And then sometimes we'll do a little oral language and vocabulary. So that could be an extended discussion of a book, or it could be like you're just showing them a picture and they're talking about it. Developing that oral language, especially for like English language learners or kids with low vocabularies, that is important in getting them to move beyond that pre-A level also. Okay, we are going to skip questions for now. We'll come back to them very shortly because we are wrapping up here and I want to get to this giveaway. So let's talk about the giveaway. I've been mentioning some of these resources, and if you are a winner tonight, you are going to get my resource for making pre-A guided reading activity binders, and you're going to get any one of these bundles. So this is like A through D is like the kindergarten bundle. E through J is, or A through J is like the first grade bundle, and then K through N is the second grade bundle. But if you're a winner, you're welcome to have any of these bundles that you want, but I would honestly get the A through N bundle because that covers like beginning of kindergarten all the way through like late second grade, early third grade. So if you're a winner, you're going to get this and you're going to get any one of these. I would recommend this one, but let's like take a look at what's included in all of this stuff. Okay, so the reason I created these pre-A guided reading activity binders is because I actually spent a lot of my teaching career both in the classroom and now as a reading specialist working with pre-A readers. And honestly, for the longest time, I felt so disorganized. Disorganized in the sense that like, I would forget different activities. Like I would do an activity one year and then totally forget it the next year. But you need a lot of different stuff for these guys because sometimes they spend a while at pre-A. And be disorganized in the fact that pre-A readers need a lot of stuff, like hands-on stuff. And that's good, but when you're like switching stuff out, like, okay, guys, we're gonna, work with these pictures and now we're gonna work with these letters. Like it takes away time from your lesson. So I felt like I wanted to have everything in one place to really maximize those minutes. And that's where these guided reading pre-A activity binders came from. So the goal is to help you minimize the amount of time that you spend switching out materials, like I talked about the problem I was having. Also help you cut down on prep time and then just get everything in one place. I'll show you how I did that with the binder setup. So the lesson planning template that's in here, it's editable, but it's designed to make planning so quick for you because it has these different little categories like letter identification, phonological awareness, letter sounds, and then I listed the different activities. And the activities, the instructions for all of them, are in this guided reading teacher book. There's tons of different ideas for different, things you can do to practice letter sounds or this or that. And so if you would like to print this, then you get all the materials. You can do color or black and white. Just read the directions for printing and then it'll tell you what to print, but you just print it and then you can bind it if you want. I like to have a hard copy so that all those things are right at my fingertips. But if you prefer not to print, you can just use this file, like the PDF version on your laptop or your iPad. It's totally up to you. So that was for you, but for the kids, what you do with this resource is you make binders for them. It's one binder per kid, but it's not like their binder. So if you have 2 pre-A groups and maybe there's 4 kids in each group, you only need 4 binders because you're not meeting with both groups at the same time, right? So it's just one binder per kid in the group, but it's not their binder. Anyway, in the binder, this was designed so that you're not constantly like passing stuff out and collecting things. These are reusable. You print these once, right? Follow the directions in there. It's all set up for you. Some of them can be put in page protectors, but then you reuse these over and over again. The kids can use dry erase markers for the pages that you would mark on. Not all of them are markable, but for the pages that you want them to mark on, you can put in a page protector, do that. But you use these for months or years. You're not always having the kids use all of the activities in one lesson because that would take hours and hours, but there's lots of options. So you assemble them and then you're good to go. So really the only other materials that you would need besides these are books because, like I said, we do want them working with books and I have 10, 10 printable emergent readers in there too for you. So those would be separate from the binder. And then like magnetic letters, and that's about it. Some counters too, but otherwise everything is right here. Now, for the older kids, or not the older kids necessarily, but the kids that are reading a little bit higher, these bundles are set up a little bit differently. Each of these levels has anchor lessons and printable books. There's usually around like 4 or 5 different books per level. And so with these anchor lessons, there's a lot in here, and it shows you what a lesson can look like at that level. Now, you don't necessarily have to do all of the things in this lesson in one lesson. You can pull these lessons apart and do different things on different lessons, right? So maybe there's like a couple options for phonics practice here. Maybe you use one of them, but then you use another one later. So you can make more than just like 4 or 5 lessons from these. There's also a 2-day lesson plan option in case you use that Jan Richardson model. But so obviously, not all your kids are going to be ready to move up to the next level after they read 4 or 5 books. So that's why I designed so many of the materials in here to also apply to the other books that you're already using. You know, maybe you've got Reading A to Z or other like leveled sets. So stuff like these rubrics, they tell you what to look for, what behaviors to look for at each level. Use them with any text, right? It's very flexible. The visuals, I was talking about that with ELLs, but any kids benefit, right? Use these with more than just the books that are included. You use them, you can even use them in whole group. They're super flexible. And there's comprehension activities, again, can be used with any book. Comprehension spinners, different questions they can do, cubes. And then last but not least, there's also word study activities. Again, they're not book specific, so they're very flexible. And if you've got books that you like to use, you can use them with those too. All right, sorry my voice is not so good, but we are going to do the giveaway. So here's all I ask for the giveaway. To win, you need to be here live. And if you are not hearing your name, please don't type anything in the chat box. I want to keep the chat box clear for those winners. So if you do hear your name, what I would like you to do is just say, I'm here, and then also email me and let me know. You know, you can choose whatever bundle you want. A through D is like kinder, E through J is first grade, K through N is second, but I recommend the A through N bundle, just me. You're welcome to whichever you like, and you're going to get the pre-A resource. So let me pull up my list here. All right, first winner, Sabrina. Sabrina.james@pgcps.org. Sabrina, if you are here, please let me know. I think I'm going to have my husband bring me a cough drop. Emma.mashardi@cewa.edu.au. Emma, if you're here, let us know. Next winner is Lisa, lmarshall1389@gmail.com. Lisa, if you're here, let us know. Amanda.way@terrellisd.org. Amanda, if you're here, let us know. Emma, yay! Emma, make sure to email me. Donna.strunk@mccreary.kyschools.us. Donna, if you're here, let us know. And I'll pull 2 more. Rachel, RAFisher@mpsaz.org. And last but not least, Mary Beth, mstraur@egsd.net. All right, congrats to the winners. Make sure you email me and let me know which bundle you would like. Again, I recommend A through N, but you're welcome to any of them. If you are not a winner, I still have a sale for you. So let me put up this link. This link is also going to, excuse me. This link is also going to show up in your email. So I'm going to email you. I think that it's set up to go out in like 45 minutes, but you're going to get the links to the discounted guided reading resources. That's going to be in there. The recording should be in there. And then the freebie is also going to be in there. But before I put up the freebie, I do want to mention, so they are on sale right now, but this sale is going to turn off in 2 days. So today is Wednesday, right? Friday, January 12th at midnight Eastern. These are in my TPT store, Learning at the Primary Pond. And on Friday at midnight Eastern, the sale is automatically going to turn off. So if you need any of this stuff, make sure that you get it discounted before midnight on Friday. And then this thing is over 30% off because it's brand new. And then all of the bundles, they already have a big discount on them just for being bundles, but they're an additional 20% off. Again, that's through Friday. let's go ahead and put up that freebie. If this link or the freebie, if it does not work for you for whatever reason, not to worry. That is going to your email. Make sure you watch for that. Like, let's say it's tomorrow night and you haven't gotten any emails from me. Wait just one day to make sure, you give it time to go through. But if it doesn't go through and you don't get anything, then definitely email me. All you need to do to reach me is respond to one of those reminder emails. Those reminder emails I set up beforehand, but it does get to my email if you respond. So if you do not get those for whatever reason, feel free to write back. And now let's go ahead and get to some questions. I know that some of you may have to go. And if you do have to go, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate you. Whoa, what was that? Oh, my husband just threw cough drops under the floor, under the door. If you can stick around for questions, please do so. I want to try to get to as many questions as possible with the cough drops that just scared the crap out of me. But otherwise, if you need to go, I understand. Thanks for being here. If you have a question and I have not answered it, please go ahead and retype that into the chat box. Okay. I got my cough drop now. Go ahead and retype your question if I missed it. There is a certificate and it is going to your inbox for attending live. You will get that in the email with the other links. Okay, so Jennifer says, how do you level your kids? I really like the Fountas and Pinnell benchmark assessment system. That has you sitting down with each child one-on-one. It does take a long time, but it's really valuable. So you get a lot of information about their decoding and their comprehension, and that's how I benchmark them. And then going forward, I continue to use running records. If you don't have access to the Fountas and Pinnell benchmark assessment system, I would recommend getting a subscription to Reading A to Z or asking your principal if you can get a subscription, because they have like leveled passages and benchmark books on there, lots of different assessments that you can use, and that's a good way to get their level too. Pina, I'm so glad this was helpful. Thank you for coming. Sabrina, just make sure to email me, and then it usually takes me like a day and a half to get to email, but I will send over your prize. Sherry, I'm so glad this was helpful. Sorry you had connection issues, but I'm glad you were able to come and join us. Angie says, do you do any written reading responses during your guided reading? Good question. So I like to, Angie, but it sometimes becomes a matter of time. But Angie, I really want to look at, I'm like talking with my hands, but you guys can't see me. I'll turn the camera back on. I like to look at my literacy block as a whole, right? Or what the kids are getting if I'm the specialist. And if we're doing written response at another time of the day, then I'm not going to worry about cramming it into guided reading. Sometimes, Angie, what it's nice to do is you can like read a book and then maybe have the kids start the reading response at the table, but then they go back to their seats and maybe as a center, they're finishing it. So that's an option. There is, Angie, one option. It's in my packs, but Jan Richardson also does this where she has like day one of a book where they're doing a lot of reading, and then day two, they do a little bit more writing. So like an A day, B day situation, if you're not able to get the written response into the guided reading lesson on a, like an everyday basis. Okay. Joanne says, when you are doing a running record on the Warren Reed book, what are the other kids doing? So that is when the other kids are reading books that we've read in previous guided reading lessons. So, like with the Nest. During lesson 2 of that, no, I guess it was lesson 1, Nest was a book that they had read the lesson before that. So I don't usually just have one book. I usually have like multiple books, but they're books that the kids have read before, so they're familiar with them. Let's see. Jill says having enough leveled books and matching them for themes or sight words being practiced is so hard. Yeah, it is. So reading A to Z for sure. ReadWorks. I don't know what grade you teach, Jill, but ReadWorks is good for I would say first grade and up. They have kindergarten passages, but I do kind of like to use the emergent text for kindergarten. Scholastic has these digital printable books, or they used to. I haven't used them, or I haven't bought new ones in a while. I've just been using the ones that I have printed out, but they might have some books you can print. Benchmark Books is a good resource. Those are actual print books. I love Rigby PMs. Those are good books to use. If you guys have other ideas, definitely type them in. Priya, yes, the slides are coming to you. I set that up to go out in 40 minutes, I think, so those should be coming to your email. Tabitha says, we've been using Words Their Way spelling program. Love Words Their Way. I am familiar with it. And would I incorporate it into guided reading time or keep it independent? So, Tabitha, my answer is yes to both. I actually like to set aside a dedicated time for word study, and I know it's hard to fit everything in, but in that dedicated time, I do meet with the kids in small groups, but it's just word study. That said, when we're doing the guided reading, I still like to incorporate parts of it. It's not necessarily the sorts, but the same concepts you can reinforce during guided reading. Most of the time, kids will be at the same word learning level as they are guided reading level, but sometimes it varies, so watch out for that. Last year, I had a little guy who we were doing level C books or level B books, but he could do word study activities at a level G. He had some other issues going on, but there can be a discrepancy. But so, Tabitha, anyway, long story short, I do incorporate some of those concepts into the word work time, but that word work time, as you saw, is pretty fast. And then they can also work on some of that stuff independently too. Joyce, I'm so glad you enjoyed this. Yes, I enjoy doing these, and I do them pretty regularly. So keep an eye on your email, and I usually email out when there's a new workshop coming. Laura says, how many times a week do you meet with each group? So, Laura, you might be interested in looking at that other workshop that I have the recording for you in the freebie. But it depends on the level of the group. So I don't meet with every group every day. There just doesn't seem to be time. I like to meet with groups 3 days a week if I can. And then my lowest group, 5 days a week, ideally. I meet with the lower kids the most and the higher kids the least. Oh, Mandy's looking for the TPT link, so let me put that up for you. If you did miss the freebie link, it is going to your email, so no worries there. Okay. Leah says, is that readingatoz.org? Is it .org? I think it might be .com. Yeah, it's .com. readinga-z.com. The ReadWorks is .org. Kim says, how often do you benchmark your students? So Kim, I do like the formal benchmarking in the beginning, middle, and end of the year, just because I would run out of books if I did it anymore. But I can do something between a formal benchmark and a really casual, warm running record by doing a cold running record of a new book. So like I said, typically I will do the running record on a book that the kids have read once already. But if I'm okay, I'm not really sure, is this child ready to move up? I can take just a cold read, and while the other kids are reading the guided reading book or during another time of the day, I can have them read that book to me and take a running record. So that's a less formal version of benchmarking, but it's an opportunity to really learn more about where they are. Amanda says, I'm so excited to get the bundle. My question is about pacing. How do you keep students and teacher, that's me, I'm bad at keeping myself on track, to get through the lessons quickly and efficiently? So Amanda, I use a timer because this is something that I really struggle with. When I know, and it takes a little while just to get in the habit of setting and resetting the timer, but when I know how much time I want to spend on each portion, then using the timer helps. Another thing too is if your kids are taking forever to read the guided reading book, it could be, not necessarily, but it could be that the guided reading book is a little too hard. Or it could be that you need to cut it in half or just read part of it that day. Let's see. Amanda also says, how long do I spend waiting on students to correct miscues and figure out the words versus giving them the word? That I feel like totally depends on the situation. Like, let's say, for example, you're reading with 4 kids, 3 of them are just like going, and you've got one and you notice that she's kind of like stuck. They're not all going to finish at the same time. That would be like, oh, miracle if the kids all finish the book at the same time. They can reread when they're done. But if I notice that one is really lagging behind, then I will like give her a word or whatever. Otherwise, I just try to figure out, is this a word that they could get? Is it the word they're going to get? And then if it is, then I might wait 4 seconds, 3 seconds, give them the word. If not, if it's a word that has a complex vowel spelling pattern that I know they don't know yet, then I might just give it to them right away. Simia, yes, the freebie is coming to your email. Oh, Susan, I'm sorry about the connection. You can feel free to email me if you're missing anything. So Rita's saying, when will the next session be? So I'm going to do, not this week. Sorry about my voice. I don't know why it's bad today. Maybe just the weird weather. It was cold and warm. Anyway, I am going to be doing some writing-focused webinars, not next week, but the following week. So you can go to, let me get the link. You can go to my website really at any time and click on workshops. And then you can see what's coming up. And then I will email out and just let you know, this is new or this is coming out. So then you can sign up if you would like. Lauren, I'm so glad you enjoy the webinars. Thank you for coming. Okay. Oh, sorry, I'm trying to scroll. Megan, I'm so glad you got some great ideas. Awesome. Lauren says, so you would suggest you getting their level from A to Z and then perhaps using your A through N resource pack. I'm just starting out with guided reading with level text, and we don't have actual labeled level text at our school. Oh yeah, that's definitely tricky. So Lauren, I would suggest getting their level from A to Z. And then you can start with the resource pack. And then in the meantime, what you can do is you can look up some of those guided reading or the level text. If you don't have books that are specifically labeled, you can look up in things like Scholastic Book Wizard. Just Google Scholastic Book Wizard. And that will kind of tell you what the level of the book is. Or let me give you this other link that's really helpful. There's a correlation chart. If let's say you want to work with the Fountas and Pinnell levels, but your books are DRA or something different, you can use this chart that I'm going to link you to here to figure out, what's what and what would match. Okay, so Carolyn says she's an ESL teacher. Would you recommend I do guided reading or focus on WordWorks? Carolyn, I don't know if WordWorks is a program where you're just talking about WordWork in general, but I would definitely do guided reading because with your students learning English, that's giving them an opportunity to work more with oral language. And, you can still definitely incorporate elements of WordWork, but I like that they're getting to use those words in reading. Yeah, so Krista, that link that I just put up, how do the passages on ReadWorks compare to guided reading levels? Those are Lexiled, which I don't really use that much, but I use that correlation chart to figure out what guided reading level they might be. Is that Chelsea or Kelsey? Kelsa? Sorry, Chelsea. What's your take about DRA for leveling kids? I haven't used the DRA in 10 years, but I know some schools do it. I guess I would defer to you guys and your experience because I don't have that much experience with it. Simia, good question. What does MSV stand for in the running record forms? So MSV stands for meaning, syntax, and visual. And Simia, you can definitely check out the Guided Reading 102 workshop that I have. That's linked in the freebie. But when you're marking for MSV, you're asking yourself, when a child made an error or when they self-corrected, were they using meaning? Were they thinking about what makes sense? Were they using syntax? Like, did it fit in the sentence? And were they using visual? Like, did they look at the letters on the page and use phonics? Deanna, ReadWorks account, where do you find the step read part? So Deanna, go, I guess I can just actually share my screen with you. Let's do that. It's going to go blank for a second, but then I'll, or actually it's not going to go blank. You're going to see me apparently. Okay. Hopefully you guys can see that, but here's ReadWorks. Okay, so let's say I'm second grade. Go for with step reads. You can use them for differentiation too, not just ELLs, but so let's do a dangerous landslide. And then you can see, so like this is like the quote unquote regular article. And then this one is the step reads up here. So this is the regular, and then step read 2 is a little bit simpler. Like it says many people were hurt instead of, oh, it's just kidding. It says it on the other one too. Am I looking at this right? Yeah. So like, for example, the first sentence here is one night in 2014, heavy rains made the ground very wet near a town in Washington. That's a big sentence for an English language learner. Instead, you have one night in 2014, lots of rain fell near a town in Washington. So that's just kind of an example of the difference. Okay. Julie, how do you fit everything for kindergarten? What is the most important thing to focus on? That's such a big question. Julie, would you email me? I do have a previous workshop that talks about scheduling your balanced literacy block and like what are the most important things to focus on. I do, Julie. I hope this summer, fingers crossed, I would really like to do just some kindergarten focused workshops. So that's kind of hopefully coming soon. Lisa says, thank you so much. I need to vamp up my guided reading, but have no books. Do you know where I can get multiple levels for cheap in kinder? I've had to buy all of my curriculum. Oh my gosh, Lisa, I'm so sorry. That's challenging for sure. So I definitely check out Reading A to Z because you can print those. I like to have hard copies of books, but printing them from like Scholastic might have some digital stuff, and whatchamacallit, Reading A to Z has a lot of stuff that you can print. That's a good place to start. You could also, Lisa, I've also gotten books on eBay. Teachers will just sell, maybe they've retired or they're not teaching anymore. They'll just sell like collections of leveled books. So maybe check that out too. So Kim says, do you incorporate iPads into your guided reading? Are there any particular apps you use for it? So apps, there's one called Word Wizard. When I do guided reading and I do word work with magnetic letters, I like to pull out the letters beforehand. So it's not like this whole huge lengthy thing of like, gotta find the letters for every kid. Like that just takes up too much instructional time. So I like to pull out the letters beforehand. But if I don't have time to pull out the letters beforehand, then I rely on that Word Wizard app. It is paid. I think there might be like a version that's free, but it's just like magnetic letters or, magnetic letters that the kids can manipulate and move around. That's a good app. Kim, there's also an app called Grow. It's GRO. I don't think small O. And that's actually for planning your guided reading lessons. That is a good app. That's more of a teacher app than a student app. Let's see. Amy said, how long did it take you to prep your guided reading materials? I get overwhelmed and I'm not born organized. So, Amy, I'm assuming you mean like put them all together and not create them, right? Creating took a very long time, like a year plus, because it was like all the stuff I'd been doing, like pulling it together. But, so for prepping, if you're using one of the bundles, I can show you, actually email me. I have a video where I show you, where I walk you through how I do my binders. And once you have that structure from the binder, it makes it pretty easy. So definitely email me and I'll send you that link. Anna's asking about a list. I'm not sure what list you meant, Anna, but maybe you could clarify because forget what I was talking about. Jessica says for bilingual class that are pre-A, what activities do you suggest to do while I'm doing guided reading? So, Jessica, honestly, a lot of the stuff that I was talking about with the pre-A, all of this stuff still applies to them with like letter ID, phonological awareness. You might, though, Jessica, want to do a little bit more with oral language. So like in my pre-A resource, you can also just go online and find some. There's pictures and you can have the kids look at the picture and talk about the picture. That's a good way to like practice oral language, teach them vocabulary words. That I think is an important part of the pre-A lesson when you've got, English language learners. Diane, you're welcome. Thank you so much for coming. Yep, the freebie is being emailed to you. The resource link, the sale link is being emailed to you. The slides are being emailed to you. All that's coming. Laura says she's graduating this year. Yay! Awesome. I'm so glad it was helpful. Thank you for coming, Masumi. Alicia, how often do you introduce a new book? So Alicia, when I'm working with like the little guys and the books are so short, I introduce a new one usually every lesson unless they really struggled with it. As we get up into like, H, I, and above, so that's like mid first grade, I may spend more than one day in a book. I try to expose the kids to as many new texts as possible because that's something that I believe, I can't quote the research, but I know there's research showing that helps them move up and advance. At the same time, I don't want to just blow through a book just for the sake of finishing it. So it's kind of on an as-need basis. And it depends on the level too, like I said. Kathy says, complicated question. One reading group is levels I through M. How would you go about working with them? That is complicated. Kathy, I wonder if you've ever tried strategy groups where, maybe they all have different level text in front of them, but you're teaching them, okay, this is how you break up words into syllables, or this is how you use the headings and table of contents to understand this text. I wonder if something like that could work for them, maybe. Hannah, that's not a silly question at all. What are the other kids doing when you're working with the small group? Hannah, they are doing literacy centers, and I have a link that I can give you if you're interested. Feel free to email me. I did a whole workshop on that previously. So it really depends on what you prefer, but I like to do like a literacy center setup. So feel free to email me for that. Michelle, I'm so glad you enjoyed it. Thank you, Jill. You're so sweet. Bye, Mawash. Thank you for coming. Okay. Kylie says, how do we cater for students who are ready to move up from their current group before anyone else, but are not yet ready to join the next level group? That's tricky. So definitely I would make them a leader in some capacity. I talked about that retelling leader setup. So that's something that, you can do for them. I would make sure, Kylie, also to maybe they're coming to you for guided reading, but I like to use a little bit of time also to meet with kids individually. So make sure to meet with like that child individually to try to challenge them and help them select texts that will challenge them a little bit more than what you can do in guided reading. So honestly, I feel like one-on-one is probably the best solution because you don't want to take them out of the group because they're still getting stuff out of it. Okay, Kathy, how do you check the student's understanding? Retelling I use a lot. I try to use like one inferential thinking question if I'm just doing a real quick check. Kathy, there's good question. What is that called? I can't think of it. The prompting guide. That's what it's called. Prompting guide. Just search in Amazon. Prompting guide, Fountas and Pinnell. I think it's in there. There's really great questions to help you just discuss with the kids and also check for their understanding. Wendy, I'm so glad you enjoyed it. Thank you for coming. Leah says there's phone apps that can give levels. Point Scan Free is one. Thanks, Allison with 2 L's. I didn't get the link for the chart. Debbie, yes, you're going to get a certificate for CPGU hours. So the chart, I think, was it maybe the reading A to Z correlation chart? Is that what you were looking for? I'm going to put that up there one more time. All right, I'm going to get going. My voice is totally shot. If I missed your question, I'm so sorry. I do want to get to you. All you need to do is email me and I will write you back. It usually does take like a day and a half for me to get to it. But if I missed your question, feel free to email me. And thank you again so much for being here. I hope to see you on the writing workshop webinars. Those are again not next week, but the week afterward. You can go to learningattheprimarypond.com, go to workshops and get signed up. If you got any questions that you think of later, feel free to email me. I'm happy to answer. And then keep an eye out for those emails. You should be getting one pretty soon here, like 20 minutes. And then if you don't get one by like tomorrow night, feel free to email me. Remember that sale is up on Friday at midnight. If you have any questions about these, feel free to email me too. Thanks for being here, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.